Okay, perhaps we can make a start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where this finds you, and a warm welcome to this webinar, Pathways to Nuclear Disarmament Verification. This is part of a series of events that UNIDIR is organising over the course of the first committee. Just to note, this event is being recorded and should be available in due course on UNIDIR's YouTube channel. In this case, we're going to focus the event on nuclear disarmament verification. Our panel are going to cover 4 different aspects of this topic. And I should add as well, before opening the floor to questions later in the session, after we've heard from our panelists, I would encourage you all to please submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I should add as well, your questions and comments will be treated anonymously, but if you do want to be attributed and credited, then please do put your name in the affiliation box. Before that, though, to provide a little bit of context, so nuclear disarmament verification is not a new topic. It has been covered in 2 groups of governmental experts and several other initiatives which have been undertaken by a range of different actors in the last couple of years. Today, they really want to hear about some recent activities that have been undertaken, and we'll learn more about this shortly with our panel. But before hearing from our panel, I'd like to turn to Ambassador Marcelo Camara, who is Director of the Department of Strategic Affairs, Defence and Disarmament with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil. He has also been a champion of work related to nuclear disarmament verification, including participation in 2 groups of governmental experts. So if you'd like to kick us off, Ambassador, I'll turn to you and the screen is yours, sir.
So thank you very much, James. At the outset, let me thank the organizers of this event for the kind invitation to speak as a panelist. I wish to commend UNIDIR for convening this event on the group of scientific and technical experts on nuclear disarmament verification, the acronym GSC-NDV, which is an initiative that has lately gained quite a salience in the agenda of the United Nations General Assembly First Commission. This process of establishing this group is a 9-year long. So Brazil and Norway, we tabled the final draft of the resolution yesterday. So I kindly invite the UNIDIR colleagues to share this latest version of the draft resolution with the participant of this seminar. So the group of scientific and technical experts on nuclear disarmament verification, if it is established by the 80th section of the United Nations General Assembly, will be a team of 21 experts with outstanding knowledge in the field of nuclear disarmament verification. They will participate in their personal capacity and without prejudice to national positions in future negotiations. This group will be tasked with collecting, preserving, and advancing knowledge on nuclear disarmament verification. The group will develop approaches to challenges that may arise in future disarmament negotiations. The group will be open to nominations from the whole UN membership in an inclusive and voluntary manner. Capacity building to foster disarmament verification expertise will be an important aspect of this group. Should this group be approved by the General Assembly, it will be the first time that the United Nations will have a group of scientists fully dedicated to address the challenges of nuclear disarmament verification, which is a very complex undertaking. So I will stop here. This is just a introduction on this matter. I'll be happy to take the floor again later on to dwell on the rationale behind the proposal of this group. So thank you, and over to you, James. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. And as indicated, we'll hear more from Marcelo shortly on the GSTE. But I really want to turn to some aspects of nuclear disarmament verification and perhaps provide a little bit of context with an overview and some further information on earlier related initiatives, including a network of nuclear disarmament verification related hubs that has been developed by colleagues at Vertic. To elaborate on this, I'm delighted to now turn the floor to Larry McFall, who is the Executive Director at Vertic. Larry's work at Vertex since 2003 has covered a range of issues, including trafficking of radioactive materials, nuclear safeguards, and nuclear disarmament verification, among several other things. But today, I want to turn to you on the topic of nuclear disarmament verification hubs, and the screen is yours, Larry. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jamie, and thank you to UNIDIR for hosting this. And it's really nice to be on the panel with yourself and Luis, Marcelo, and Pavel. So thanks very much for that. And I think it's timely that we're discussing this issue now and showing that there are vibrant ideas and initiatives despite the ongoing or even plummeting deterioration in the arms control disarmament system. It's important to show that there are still pathways and groups of people that are committed to peace and stability. So you've asked me to talk about the Nuclear Disarmament Verification Hubs initiative, which I think is a great example of this kind of activity, and one that has, I suppose, to put it a certain way, come from the bottom up. So I will briefly describe the origins of the hubs from our perspective, and I hope I will be able to represent the perspectives of our partners as well. So as you may be aware, Vertic, like many of us, have worked on disarmament verification alongside lots of other work on peace and security for many years. We assisted with the UK-Norway initiative on warhead dismantlement, and later looked at the role of IGOs in nuclear disarmament verification, and the role of multilateral verification more broadly, including widening the perspective to not just include warhead dismantlement, but the entire nuclear weapons enterprise. This allowed us to do fuel cycle analysis and combine this with overhead imagery analysis with partners in ONN and CNS and RUSI, and we continue that work to this day. But throughout that time, we've focused on multilateral approaches and in particular capacity building. And we've wanted to work with partners throughout the world on verification and exploring how all countries can contribute towards disarmament, or at least be sufficiently informed and convinced that it's happening when it happens. Capacity building will be important to sustain and grow the field of experts. Growth, because this means that there will be more, it'll be a more representative group, and sustained since it's unclear how long this endeavor will be. Moreover, with the advent of rapidly evolving technology, capacity building and familiarization is likely going to be needed on these aspects as well. But it's important to note expertise can come from a wide range of technical disciplines for effective verification, explosive detection, material science, physical measurements. And so there is a lot of contributions that can come from lots of different countries if verification is multilateral. But there are also specific regional experiences which have a good and very informative bearing on this enterprise. And that I'll come to that in a second. So why hubs and why involve more regions? Well, in terms of principles, we think that greater involvement, awareness, and capacity can benefit all states who support disarmament, strengthens confidence, trust, and transparency, and therefore the achievement and durability and depth of disarmament. Mutual assurance can help bridge divides or cement cooperative relationships. And we've also noticed, not only in nuclear disarmament verification, but in conventional forces monitoring and many other areas, that the act of working together on collaborative technical research on verification can enhance transparency and confidence and openness. It doesn't always work out in the end, we've noticed, but it can certainly bridge divides and help. Of course, the principle is also supported by the special session on disarmament, which I know that has come up many times in the context of the GSDE. All peoples of the world have a vital interest in the success of disarmament negotiations, have a right to participate on an equal footing, and that disarmament agreement should provide for adequate measures of verification. And it's important to note, as many of our colleagues have said, that verification isn't a substitute for political will, and it is not a conditional prerequisite. This is an important feature, and I think this has come up during the context of the GSDE, so we don't always need to say it, but I think in this particular context, it's important to bring it up. So the Hubs initiative seeks to directly support what I've just been talking about, the ability of a wider range of stakeholders to participate in the field of nuclear disarmament verification. And we know that there have been plenty of other initiatives in this field, the UK, Norway, which I mentioned earlier, the Quad, the IPNDV, lots of work done by UNIDIR, Princeton, Germany, China. But this initiative complements those ongoing initiatives by involving other regions and countries, but also trying to do things at a more country level as well. So while it links the international process, it's meant to inspire and harness activities at the country level to identify what the interest is, what they can offer, and how they can be supported. So it's meant to give more breadth and depth to the kind of diplomatic and technical support that you've seen countries like Norway and Brazil be spearheading. So the regions, at least for now, are Africa, Central Asia, and Latin America. And as I mentioned, all states have a stake in nuclear disarmament, but some countries in these regions have unique experiences that can be leveraged to support or at least inspire multilateral nuclear disarmament. Latin America, we have the first nuclear weapons free zone, and we also have the intriguing example of a bilateral inspection regime between Argentina and Brazil. In Africa, the South Africans gave up the nuclear weapons program. It was verified. Now the entire continent is a nuclear weapons-free zone. While in Kazakhstan, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, they spent many, many years decommissioning a nuclear test site. But it's not just those countries. All of the countries in those regions have a stake. So, supported by the government of Norway, we have helped establish networks in these regions. Networks that have involved IGO officials, former diplomats, academics, and technical experts from the nuclear industry and related regulatory programs. The hub's activities over several years have involved workshops, research, courses, and these have all been aimed at harnessing existing expertise and awareness, but also broadening and deepening and sustaining it. We've provided educational activities for diplomats, students, professionals, and also helped generate research papers that have looked at regional perspectives and experiences on nuclear disarmament verification and also technical matters. And we've sought to link these regions. But of particular relevance to today's meeting and what Marcelo is going to talk about is that alongside these activities, the hubs have been aware of and supportive of the GSDE process, as has Vertic. So the Latin American hub established a working group to produce a publication, while in Africa they've also run a working group, and both have come out with conclusions that are very supportive of the GSDE. They've welcomed the initiative, that it is under the auspices of the United Nations, arguing that it can advance nuclear disarmament verification by offering a multilateral technical platform that includes all states, especially those in the global south. And ultimately, it's seen as an occasion for not only nuclear armed states, but non-nuclear armed states to not just be observers, but actively help shape future NDV discussions, which I think links back to these initial principles that I was talking about. Vertic has had a very long interest in the concept of the GSDE, and it's fantastic to hear Marcelo at the beginning of the meeting talking about where the resolution is now. And I understand he will talk about the inspiration for the initiative as well, which is a inspiring story, I think. And we completely agree with Brazil and Norway's assessment that GSDE under the UN auspices can give it multilateral credence. So why in the UN? It's because it can give it multilateral credence, and so it can be drawn on for future disarmament negotiations. And we're aware that there's been a very considerable amount of thought and work put into what this GSDE should focus on, which areas of nuclear disarmament, how it should operate, and then a huge amount of work has been put into socializing idea with countries. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing Marcelo's talk on this, and thank you very much, Jamie.
Many thanks, Larry, and indeed thank you for setting the scene. I think you mentioned several past initiatives, including the group of government experts on nuclear disarmament verification, which concluded in 2023. The second one did. Part of the discussion in the group was on the merits, demerits, and possible mandate and modalities of a group of scientific and technical experts. And since then, there've been informal consultations, and Brazil and Norway have tabled this resolution. For further insights onto this, I'm delighted to once again give the floor on the screen to Ambassador Marcelo Camara to provide some further elaboration. So perhaps I can give the floor back to you, Ambassador. You're muted, Ambassador.
Okay. Thank you, James. I'd like to concentrate my presentation on the rationale behind the proposal of the GSE and V, which stemmed off, working papers on this matter presented in the two GGEs, that you rightly pointed out in your introductory remarks. The first consideration that led me to submit the GST proposal as the Brazilian expert to the first GGE was the recognition that scientific community can and should make contributions in terms of providing advice on complex issues. There are many past and current examples of progress achieved by scientific diplomacy in areas where political disagreement is rife. In the nuclear field, we could certainly mention the group of scientific experts, the GSE, that worked prior to the CTBT. I will come back in detail to this experience of the GSE, which I find highly enlightening. The second driver of the GST proposal was the positive effects of verification in any disarmament and non-proliferation undertaking. Verification ensures compliance, thereby fostering trust, sadly, a rare commodity nowadays. On that note, I shall mention Brazil's specific case in the nuclear global order. Although unrelated to nuclear disarmament, the construction of mutual confidence between Argentina and Brazil through the Brazilian-Argentine Accounting and Control of Nuclear Material Agency, ABAC, in the past 34 years, is a sheer example of the positive spillover effects generated by verification. The GST proposal seems us also to be very opportune against the backdrop of the continuous erosion of world's nuclear security architecture and the long stalemate in the nuclear disarmament agenda. The group can serve as a platform for collaboration around nuclear disarmament verification. And convergence are most necessary in strife-riding times. And let me recognize that nuclear disarmament verification is perhaps one of the few areas that can allow for advance, regardless on the means of the realization of disarmament. Let me now come back to the GSE group of scientific experts, which is a major source of inspiration to GST and V. So beginning in 1958, scientific experts occasionally held meetings on the verification of a nuclear test ban. So in the following year, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union declared moratorium in nuclear testings. In 1963, the three countries negotiated the treaty banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. They then called the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which confined testing to underground, but did not include a verification regime. In 1964, countries of the 18 Nation Disarmament Committee, the precursor to the Conference of the Committee on Disarmament and the current Conference on Disarmament, put the proposal of a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty on its agenda, where it remained dormant for more than 30 years. Despite the calls of generation for a total ban on nuclear testing, times was not yet ripe for the important political and scientific effort that such a treaty would require. In 1970, the Non-Proliferation Treaty entered into force, and in 1972, the first arms control agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union were signed, namely the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. Far from the public attention, in mid-July 1973, an ad hoc meeting convened by two young Swedish experts, Hans Israelsson and Ola Dahlman, came up with the idea that a sustained process of technical meetings could reach a common understanding on an international verification system of nuclear testing. They stated to think about on an institutional framework of such a group as well on its mandate. At that time, Sweden had a state secretary for disarmament, which gave full support to that initiative. The Swedish ambassador to the Conference on the Committee on Disarmament, the CCD, was then instructed to take whatever necessary actions to create the group under the auspice of the CCD. At that time, the CCD had 31 members. Most of them voiced interest in that proposal. Some, however, were hesitant or even uninterested. The proposal was debated for almost 2 years until the CCD on July 76 decided to create the ad hoc group of scientific government experts to consider international cooperative measures to detect and identify seismic events. Well, the moniker most used to that group was, as I told you, the GSE, the group of scientific experts. Well, both for practical and political reasons, the group's program of work was limited to verification through seismology, the science that measures elastic waves propagating through the interior of the Earth from explosions and earthquakes. At that time, the key challenge was the detection and identification of underground nuclear explosion. Seismic verification would then form the basis of a verification regime of nuclear testing. It should be stressed that a comprehensive test matrix had been under discussion mostly among non-nuclear weapon states and NGOs. The key actors, the 5 states that at that time possessed nuclear weapons, did not show serious interest in the GSE. So far as to say that in several ways, this reflects the situation of nuclear disarmament today. There have been a lot of initiatives aimed at a nuclear disarmament verification in the past decades, but there is now little political will, if any, to engage in nuclear disarmament negotiations. I will come back to that point later. Well, let me provide you details on the work of the GSE. Well, membership of the GSE was open to any state and not only to the 31 members of the CCD. The group had 2-week meetings per year in Geneva, and in each year, a progress report was submitted to the CCD. The CCD deferred to the GSE to elect its chairman. It was also decided that the group should seek to achieve consensus in its reports, and that whenever consensus cannot be achieved, each expert will be entitled to incorporate his own or her own view. The group worked in an informal basis with unofficial working papers and proceedings. The GSE had 3 main mandates. The first mandate concentrated only on seismic data exchange and evolved gradually to encompass other verification tools and techniques. The approval of the second and the third mandates were not easy, and diplomatic negotiations in the CCD and then turned CD were necessary. In the first mandate, the CCD required a consensus decision to continue the GSE's work after each full report. For the second and the third, however, there was no time frame specified for the work, with no data requested for a final report. Well, the GSE had 2 chairs and 1 scientific secretary. The scientific secretary produced a report for every meeting, which was adopted as indicated by consensus. The scientific secretary was also assigned to compile and coordinate the presentation of all working papers and documents. Besides the 2 weeks meetings per year, there was an intense intersessional work. It should be noted that the GSE contacted a variety of organizations with interests that were relevant to its work, such as the World Meteorological Organization, WMO. Noteworthy is also that GSE conducted 3 large-scale tests with the participation of institutions around the globe. Each of these tests engaged hundreds of technical experts around the world. In its initial session in August 76, scientific experts and representatives of 17 countries attended the meeting. Notably absent were experts from the Soviet Union and its allies. However, the Soviets joined in the second session. There was always a friendly atmosphere of work, despite the Cold War geopolitical divides. Achieving consensus in international bodies is often very hard, but the GSE was to a great degree immune to stalemates. During the 20-year lifetime of the process, the number of countries attending the GSE meetings in Geneva reached 40, including both members of CCG and non-members. Some diplomats were present to observe the proceedings, but generally refrained from participating in the discussions. This provided the important benefit of avoiding political discussions and enabled the experts to concentrate on the basic scientific and technical issues. There were few participants from developing countries, not because of lack of interest or expertise, but rather due to the travel costs, which had to be covered by each individual country. All states with nuclear weapons eventually participate in the group, including those non-parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, DPRK, India, Israel, and Pakistan. Much of the most significant support of the GSC came from informal meetings and workshops arranged by individual countries and scientific institutions around the world. These outreach activities had the additional benefit of increasing the collective knowledge and experience that would prove useful in the establishment and operation of the future global system of test verification. Even before the negotiations on the CTBT began, the CD members decided in 1993 that they would take into account the work of the GSE. It was clearly their interest to do so, since the GSE had been working on the key aspects of nuclear test verification for almost 20 years. Well, when the CTB negotiation in the CD commenced, the chairman of the negotiation committee briefed the GSE on the progress of the negotiations, and the chairman of the GSE briefed the committee on its work. So the GSE maintained its independence throughout the negotiations. At the end, the treaty negotiators understood that GSE had laid out the groundwork of the verification requirements of the CTBT. They applied the model and concepts developed by the GSE in seismology to other technologies of infrasound, hydroacoustics, and radionuclide detection in the verification regime of the treaty. Let me try to draw some conclusions from the experience of the GSE, which might be important for the work of the GSE NDV should it be approved by the General Assembly. First, so the GSE proved that it's possible and indeed most useful to conduct preparatory scientific and technical analysis prior to political negotiations. The work of the GSE was not seen by the states as a substitute for political negotiations or a commitment to commence such negotiations. Thirdly, the tense Cold War atmosphere affected the work of the group, but it yielded tangible and important results. This was possible because the chairs managed to stave off politically controversial issues. Well, the first chair even recognized that his main priority was not to make rapid progress, but to keep the process alive. Well, the formal framework of the GSE provided by the CD was important because it established a link to a political body, even when no substantial political discussions were taking place. Fifthly, despite political difference among participating states, the GSE was able, over time, to foster a culture of international technical cooperation that led to mutual confidence in the verification solutions developed and tested by the group. Sixthly, a more general experience is that scientists, when challenged, are eager to engage and contribute to resolve important issues relating to global security. This was demonstrated not only by the GSE, but also by the International Panel on Climate Change. Climate and environmental scientists worked for decades within this forum to provide the scientific basis for the 2016 Paris Agreement on climate change. Well, the proposal of the GSE draws to a great extent on the successful experience of the GSE. There are, however, at least three main differences that I deem worth highlighting. The first one is that unlike the GST will not be tasked to come up with a comprehensive verification mechanism for a world without nuclear weapons. This would be a too ambitious goal, and most likely we will not have the endorsement of nuclear weapon states. The second one revolves around the difference in nature between verification of nuclear tests and nuclear disarmament verification. Seismology, which underpinned the verification of nuclear tests, was only applied in the civilian uses. On the contrary, nuclear disarmament verification is related to military domain and therefore has sensitive aspects for the security of nuclear weapons possessor states. Well, the last difference is that unlike the GSC, the CD seems not to be the suitable institutional framework for the GSC. As known since the CTBT negotiations in '96, the CD has been unable to approve a program of work. The protracted impasse in the CD as a result of the consensus decision-making rule among its 65 members has sadly made it a dysfunctional organ in the UN disarmament machinery. Well, Brazil and Norway, we are aware that the major impediment to nuclear disarmament is the lack of political will. But on the other hand, we are also persuaded that nuclear disarmament verification is a very complex undertaking, which encompasses a broad range of scientific and technological issues. To address this challenge in a scientific and inclusive group would bring about tangible benefits when there will be a political will to realize nuclear disarmament. And finally, there is already, as Larry has just pointed out, a rich wealth in NDV knowledge as demonstrated by several initiatives, such as the UK-Norway initiative, the Quad, the IPNGV, and others. There were also important experience in verification not directly related to nuclear disarmament, which also need to be assessed and incorporated to the UN system. I am certain that UNIDIR can make important contributions in fostering the archival work of a possible GST and NDV. This is also one of the reasons that justify its establishment. So I'll stop here and thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador, for excuse me, providing some of the context and the lessons from the past that can inform current discussions. I think towards the end of your remarks, you mentioned archival work, and it strikes me one of the challenges will be preserving, transferring scientific and technical knowledge. So to explore some tools that could help in this regard, I want to now turn to my colleague, Louisa, who has been working on the development of a repository of NDV resources. Louisa is a research assistant with us here at UNIDIR's Weapons of Mass Destruction program, and her areas of expertise and research interests include nuclear disarmament verification, nuclear safeguards, and decision making. And Louisa, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Jamie, for giving me the screen. It is a great pleasure to be joining this panel today on pathways to nuclear disarmament verification. As Jamie mentioned, Marcelo has set up my part of the panel very nicely, and I'm delighted to present today the first look at a new digital tool that UNIDIR has been developing, who we can hopefully now see on the screen. So it's called Nuclear Disarmament Verification Repository, or NDVR for short, and it's intended to be an interactive digital platform developed to consolidate and organize knowledge and verification in arms control and disarmament processes. I should note at the outset that this has been possible due to the generous financial support from the government of Norway. And today I will focus my remarks briefly on the context of the project, followed by a walkthrough of the envisioned features of the repository, and then some concluding thoughts. So, as we have heard, in recent years, several efforts have aimed at advancing nuclear disarmament verification, which shows how timely these initiatives are. So from the 2023 GGE discussions, a key takeaway was the recognition of the potential value of drawing on past and present arms control and disarmament experiences. Why? Because mapping the methods and approaches used in previous agreements, including from different areas, as Marcelo has just mentioned, not exclusively nuclear, could inspire practical options for future NDV activities. So this is something that we're proposing to address with NDVR to some extent. So now focusing on what is the Nuclear Disarmament Verification Repository. So the idea of NDVR is to, as I mentioned, is to consolidate and organize in a dedicated space the vast materials and knowledge on verification, arms control, and disarmament processes. While its primary focus is on nuclear disarmament verification, NDVR will draw on experiences from other arms control and disarmament processes to illustrate the range and the scope of options for verifying compliance. So this will include methodologies, procedures, and technologies. By consolidating existing resources, we hope that NDVR will make verification knowledge more accessible and navigable for policymakers, practitioners, researchers, whoever is interested. Additionally, it could provide support for future work on NDV and global capacity building efforts, as we've been hearing, through enhanced access to information and best practices on verification. So now, if you allow me getting into the good part, I am pleased to present the first look at the platform that we're developing. We're nearing the end of the development phase of the website, and we hope to soon, in the next month or so, move into the testing stage, where we'll be reaching out to experts for their feedback, both on the content and the website functionality. We expect to officially launch NDVR later this year or early next year, depending on how testing goes. And I should note that regarding translation, that initially the platform will be available in English, but we're also working to make it available in all official UN languages. So now I will do a brief walkthrough of the features that we're envisioning. As you can see on the screen, we have 4 specific features in mind, and I'll briefly get into them. If we could go to key terms, please. So the idea of this section is to have a selection of definitions of key terms that are commonly used in verification-related discussions, which is why we have provisionally selected these terms, as you can see on the screen. So verification, treaty agreements or arrangements, obligations and commitments, effectiveness, confidence, and compliance. You often hear those terms referred when you are in a discussion about verification. Now, if we could go to the verification, for example, you can see that what we have done here is collect several excerpts directly from UN documents. So rather than providing a single authoritative definition, this section presents multiple interpretations drawn from official UN documents. As you can see in this definition specifically for verification, these are all derived from consensus documents, so reports of previous panels or groups of governmental experts on verification. So dating back from the 90s to the most recent in 2023. For example, the last one is the working definition for NDV that was established by the group of governmental experts in 2023. I won't go into detail about the definition itself. If we scroll down a little bit, so this is where the archival work comes in. We have also added space for additional resources. So here's where we really want to consolidate this archival work because there is a wealth of resources available that we intend to populate the repository with them. So at first, we're focusing mostly on UN resources, reports, working groups, resolutions. So that's what we intend to showcase there. And you can see the example of the last 2 GG reports on NDV already there. If we can move on to tools, please. So this is our second feature. So for tools, the idea is to provide an illustrative overview of methods, procedures, and techniques that have been applied in the verification practice of existing arms control and disarmament agreements. Some tools that we have chosen to include in the stage, as you can see, are national technical means, declarations, notifications. If you scroll down, you can see on-site inspections, continuous monitoring, compliance mechanisms, and TCBMs. So I should note that while these verification components are presented in separate categories, in practice, many of these tools are overlapping and mutually reinforcing. So for example, on-site inspections are part of monitoring measures. If we could go to the declaration example, you see that the idea here is to have a brief definition of what this is. And I should note that these definitions are drawn from previous UNIDIR's work. So we have an arms control lexicon and a verification handbook. And this is where these definitions come from. I won't go into details about the definition itself, but I should also note that we also intend to list some examples from which treaties make use of these tools, and then you'll soon find out about our treaties page where they can be redirected there. So if we can move to treaties, please. So this is our third feature, and the purpose of this section is to provide a factual outline of key practices in nuclear and other functional treaty regimes that may be relevant to nuclear disarmament verification, as we've been discussing. So as you can see, we have dedicated tabs to filter the treaties according to specific regimes, so nuclear, chemical, biological, space, conventional. At the moment, we have the NPT example here. So if we could go there, you see that we have decided to include the following information regarding verification arrangements. So we're starting with some overview, so a background information on the treaty and its current status, what year it was signed, where year it entered into force, if it has been extended, if it has expired, followed by objectives and definitions. So here, what the treaty verifies. Then data exchanges, declarations, or notifications. So the types of information to be provided by the parties. Then inspections or investigations. So if there are inspections, and so what sort of inspections you have in this treaty, if there are any, followed by monitoring. So the types of monitoring measures that have been accorded. And lastly, consultative mechanisms. So what body is responsible for addressing concerns, compliance concerns, or clarifications related to the implementation of the treaty. I should note that this part will require the most significant effort from our team. There are over 50 treaties that we would like to include across all these regimes. So this will take several months to be concluded, but I can say that we have already started. And here we also have a space for resources. So this will be common to all features of the database, where we'll add relevant resources. So here you have the treaty text and the document of the IMCIRC 153. Plus, we can add other relevant documents, working papers, and so on. Now, if we could go to institutions, please. So the purpose of this section is to provide an overview of the different ways institutional arrangements can be established and to outline their respective mandates, structures, and oversight roles in monitoring compliance. So in the interest of time, I won't go into detail, but we have organized them around 4 categories, and you can see some examples there. So we have meetings of states parties, technical bodies, consultative commissions, and ad hoc bodies. And now if we could please go to the compare functionality. So lastly, we are also working on a compare feature. So the idea is this section is intended to allow for a factual comparison to see how differently or how similar verification regimes can be set up, depending on the scope, objective, and purpose of the agreement. So I should note that this is not an analysis of the verification regime, nor a comprehensive overview, but this is to give you an idea. And you can see the NPT example on the screen. So these are basically the same information that we have on the treaty page, but here you can do a comparison between different treaties. Now, lastly, let me just briefly conclude by saying that I believe NDVR comes at a timely moment, building on almost a decade of momentum in nuclear disarmament verification efforts. And it attempts to address issues identified in recent discussions and also aims to complement practical initiatives that can help advance nuclear disarmament, such as hopefully a GST process. I'll stop here now. Thank you very much, and back to you, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Louisa. Verification remains an area of interest for us in UNIDIR in relation to nuclear, of course, but also biological, space, and several other issue areas. In this regard, I think having a comprehensive resource is really useful, so thank you for your work on that. I'm sure some of our participants may have questions. I'd encourage you, please do submit any questions you may have through the Q&A function, which should be accessible at the bottom of your screen. I will get to these shortly, but before that, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Pavel. A bit of context here, the GG, which concluded in 2023, that the report from that emphasized or looked at the importance of exercises and practical experiments. And some of this could include things like scenario-based exercises that allow the testing of new and existing technologies and methods in practice. This is something that UNIDIR has been exploring through earlier work involving a field experiment to test procedures for verifying the absence of nuclear weapons at storage sites. But to take this further, UNIDIR has developed the concept of demonstrative verification and is in the process of developing scenarios for field experiments. And to learn more about this, I'm going to turn to Dr. Pavel Popovic, who's going to give you an overview of this project. For those of you that don't know, Pavel is a senior researcher in the WMD program at UNIDIR, and his work focuses on nuclear disarmament, arms control, nuclear security, and verification. And over to you, Pavel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie. Thanks, everyone who joined us today. I want to start with the emphasizing that verification is a very complex process, and as the GGE report, for example, described it, it includes a lot of components from technologies, methods, procedures, and importantly, judgments about various behaviors. And the goal of the verification is to enable assessment of compliance with certain obligations that a state may assume. And generally, it is assumed almost by default that these obligations and procedures would be specified in a treaty. And that's for a large part how it's done before. But I would also note that the GGE report also envisioned unilateral obligations and unilateral undertakings. And you could imagine, and we've seen actually many examples of states promising making political obligations to do certain things or not to do certain things. And the question is not in the possibility of unilateral obligations here, but what do you do about procedures? What do you do about verification of protocols? Who would specify them? With whom would you negotiate? And this is the approach that we decided to explore, and this is the concept that we've developed. We call it demonstrative verification, and the basic idea is that if a state assumes certain obligations, it should have interest in proving that it is compliance with the obligations it assumed. The challenge here, of course, is that the state would need then find a way to prove that compliance in a way that cannot be challenged. With treaties, it is relatively simple, conceptual at least. You follow the procedures that you negotiated. You invite inspectors if necessary. You go through you do declarations, notifications, exhibits, and things like that. But what if there is no treaty and the inspectors are not coming? You could imagine that a state may even invite people to come and see, but then this demonstration may not be very convincing. And we've seen these examples in the past. For example, you could show people a container and you tell them that there is a cruise missile inside, but then apparently skeptics would say, how do we know that this missile has a certain range, or what's inside the container to begin with? So if to kind of deal with this issue, one way of doing so, and we believe that's a plausible way of doing so, is to develop a public protocol, develop a public procedure, and follow that procedure and do it in a way that proves your compliance, even to a skeptical eye. So the protocol here in the concept will be the verification part, and the show to the world, the demonstration to the world is exactly the demonstrative part of the concept. So to illustrate and to test, sort of to see how it works, could work in practice, we undertook a project and we developed a set of scenarios for real live experiments, which we believe I believe that they will demonstrate this approach in practice and also explore potential problems that these procedures could encounter. So the first one, we had three scenarios. I will talk briefly about them. The first is relatively simple. Imagine if there is a state that has a number of ICBM silos, has a number of silos for intercontinental ballistic missiles. And imagine if the state would remove missiles from some of those silos. And that's something that's been done. For example, right now in the United States, there are 450 silos that can host an ICBM, and only 400 missiles are actually deployed. Again, in the New START context, the way that the United States would prove that the missiles have been removed would be to go through the inspection procedures. There is a procedure in the treaty that Russian inspectors could come in and literally look inside. But if there is no treaty, and there will be no New START treaty in a few months, so what do you do? The immediate idea is like, well, what can you do? You can open the silo, you can open the cover, and so everyone can see that there is nothing inside. And anyone can see, and the original idea was that you could see that with the satellite, sort of, and that is a public knowledge, and you could verify independently of the owner of the silo. However, as I said, it has to be the protocol, the procedure has to be robust in the sense that it should withstand the challenge, and that means that you need to develop a protocol that would pick up a silo for a demonstration, because presumably the state would not want to open everything; they would want to open only some of the silos. So you need a protocol to pick up a silo. Then you need a procedure for actually looking inside. And this is where we explored a number of approaches. Satellites is one of them. But then again, what do you do if it's cloudy? So how do you deal with that? So the current idea that we hope test in the experiment is to literally send a video crew and actually film this and transmit it in real time. Then there are some guards to make sure that you are really showing the silo that you've chosen. So, maybe it is possible that just an open cover would be enough of a proof because the state may not want to keep its silo exposed to the elements for a long time. But if the silo is empty, you can do that. So that's the one experiment, one scenario that we looked at. The other scenario is somewhat different in that we imagine that the state may want to prove that, for example, it has not deployed its nuclear weapons. So if you imagine a state that normally keeps its nuclear weapons in storage in a bunker, as Russia actually does, then if the state would want to kind of provide everyone with proof that it hasn't moved those weapons out, it could just install barriers in front of the gates to the bunker, and again let everyone to see that these barriers have not been moved. Again, this is the concept. We explored some ideas for how these barriers could look like. And it is a bit more complicated than it may sound because you need to guard against various, again, to make it robust, to make it withstand the challenge, you need to kind of think about the protocol in some detail. But nevertheless, we believe that that can be done, and we've developed a number of ideas for those barriers. And the plan is to have an experiment and just to take a look and see what is possible and what are potential challenges here. Finally, we really wanted, and I think this is a very important part. We really wanted to see if you could apply this kind of approach to space activities. And again, space is difficult, more difficult, but than Earth. But nevertheless, certain things can be done. And apparently, what the problem that we looked at was how a state would prove, or at least try to prove, that its activities are not threatening. For example, we know that a number of states are conducting experiments with what is known as rendezvous and proximity operations when they approach their own satellites and try to capture them or do something of the kind. And there are concerns about the applicability of this kind of technology for less benign purposes. So what can be done in this case? Well, I think we eventually arrived to the conclusion that the transparency is one potential approach here. So, and specifically, if a state wants to provide assurances that it is not planning to capture other satellites, the state could provide orbital elements of its satellite and do it publicly in a format that has been already in existence for some time, and some companies actually do that. And so just the fact of publishing this data already is in our view, is a strong sign of the kind of non-threatening behavior of a satellite. So, and again, the demonstrative part here is not just in the publication, but it is important that if I were to publish orbital data of my satellite, then independent observers and even private citizens can actually verify that I'm publishing the actual information, and they could look, and there are people who are good at that, who are detecting these satellites in orbit. So that is another experiment. And again, the idea why do we want to do it in the experiment is precisely to see what kind of problems these procedures can encounter. And so there are, of course, other possibilities, and the beauty of this approach, if you will, is that, as I said, if a state wants to, if a state undertakes a certain obligation, and if it wants to prove that it is in compliance, it can build its activities in a way that would facilitate the verification, that would facilitate this demonstration. And that is what is necessary. What is required is just the will to do so. And I think that is we believe that this is an approach that can be useful in many applications, and this is our report, and our experiments are designed to be a proof of concept, and we hope that eventually this people will start thinking about this approach more and more, and find practical applications of this verification technique. And we will probably get into the repository at some point, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pavel, for what I hope is some useful food for thought for participants here. I think we should have a copy of the report in the chat. If not, it is available on the website. I do want to turn now and open it up to questions from participants. We do have a couple of minutes and we'd welcome any comments, questions or thoughts using the Q&A function. I think in the meantime, perhaps one question that seems important to me, and I'll direct this towards Marcelo and Larry, but there's a question really, how do we have a conversation about something sensitive in relation to nuclear disarmament without revealing potentially proliferation sensitive or national security sensitive information? I wonder whether either of you would like to take that. Please go ahead, Ambassador.
So thank you for that question, James. As I remarked in my presentation, unlike seismology, well, nuclear disarmament revolves around technologies used in the military domain, which are very sensitive for countries that possess nuclear weapons. So any approach or methodology for nuclear disarmament verification should, I'll say, be proliferative resistant, in the sense that inspectors from non-nuclear weapon states should not be privy to information that can be misused for, I'll say, for forbidden purpose. So this is one of the challenges, for nuclear disarmament verification, because the methodologies and techniques and technologies to be applied in this domain should, I'll say, provide guardrails that this exercise will not allow for, I'll say, the proliferation of sensitive information. So how to, I'll say, provide the participation of non-nuclear weapon states experts or representatives with nuclear weapons possessor ones is one of the challenges that this group should address. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador. Larry, did you want to add anything to that question? The screen's yours if you do.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, it's a really important question, and I think it's one that the GSD process has grappled with, and as Marcelo says, it's going to be important to look at this in the future. I think I'd say from our perspective, there are kind of divide this into two areas. One is discussing verification more broadly, and the other is actually conducting verification exercises or the actual verification itself. I mean, when it comes to discussions, the bottom level, of course, nuclear weapons state, nuclear armed states officials should be well versed in not, but obliged by their own national law, by international law, not to reveal proliferative information, and should really be well versed in doing that, even in detailed discussions about it. But and this has been tested. UK-Norway initiative, the Quad IPNDV. We have seen nuclear armed states, nuclear weapons states officials discussing nuclear disarmament verification in detail without proliferative information being raised. So I think we've already demonstrated that it can be done. We've already demonstrated that it can go into, I'd say, a pretty useful level of operational detail without risking proliferative information, talking about verification requirements, parameters, facilities, and so on and so forth. So the next step is, can you actually do it? Can you actually do verification or test exercises without revealing proliferative information? And this is work in progress, as Marcelo has said, but it's work that has been looked at for several years. Managed access procedures, I'd recommend people look at information barriers. There's been quite a lot of work on these kinds of procedures and equipment that can be used to overcome this issue. This is a work in progress, but there's been plenty of work that's done on it, and that should continue and hopefully be accelerated by something like a GSDE.
Right. Thank you. I'm conscious we don't have any other questions. So unless people do want to share and submit any questions or comments, please do let me know. If not, what I suggest is perhaps I turn to our panelists to provide some sort of closing remarks in the meantime. And perhaps, Louisa, I can begin with you. There was a comment on the work of IPNDV and NTI on collecting data, but I wonder whether you wanted to address that and then any closing, concluding thoughts you may have. The screen is yours, Louisa.
Thank you, Jamie. And yes, thank you for the comment that we got on other nuclear disarmament resource repositories. Our idea is to be mindful and build on the resources that already exist with the approach of complementing rather than duplicating these efforts. I would say perhaps one of the differences is that NDVR is exclusively focused on verification arrangements and methodologies, techniques, and procedures. I didn't get a chance to go over it in the presentation, but I just wanted to flag as well that we'll also have a dedicated other resources page in the repository, where we will certainly include other existing resources, and such as the NTI treaties and regimes resources, Vertex, GCST hub as well, and there's the AMC database, so we are aware of that. And we do intend to redirect people to these other sources. I'd just like to close by reiterating that we hope that NDVR is a timely contribution to ongoing efforts in nuclear disarmament verification that can add on to what already exists. And I hope that by bringing together existing knowledge and practices on verification in one accessible space, that it can support future work, capacity building, and initiatives like the GST, if it comes to that, while also serving as a resource for disarmament education and dialogue. But that's it. Thank you. And back to you, Jamie.
Okay, thank you very much, Louisa. Perhaps I can turn to you, Pavel, for any sort of concluding thoughts or comments, and perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on the plan for conducting the experiments that you described. And the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say maybe someone would volunteer to host the kind of experiments that we have in mind. I would, as I said, well, the space part, I believe we could do kind of some almost in-house in a way, because that would just involve, although that would involve contacting a company that operates a satellite and have them set up this data sharing, the orbital element sharing arrangement. But yeah, we have some companies in mind. With silos, well, the challenge, of course, is that we would love to have the actual silo. And ideally, one of those 50 empty silos in the US that are there. And I think it's not just the problem of kind of just being authentic in a way, although that's the issue. I think that, for example, when you have, and we've found it out when we did the experiment here in Switzerland that verified the absence of nuclear weapons at the facility. You interact with like real military personnel, and they have their own ideas about what you can or cannot photograph, or what you can or cannot tape. So and I think that would be, in my view, that would be the value of having it in kind of a with the real silo, because then I don't know, the U.S. Air Force people may have their own ideas about having people with video cameras around. We'll find out. The United States is not the only place that have silos. We are looking at, not very many places have them. Luckily, fortunately, I hope. So there are some test silos as well. There are some silos at space launch facilities that we could try to use. So that's the idea. The experiment with barriers is in a way simpler, because we could test many various barriers just on a parking lot. All we need is just put them there and have someone take a satellite image, and then we'll see what we see. So that's the idea. Well, as I said, I mean, if there are volunteers among states who maybe you have a silo that you don't know of. Let us know. We'll be happy to come and inspect it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel. I have no further questions or comments directed my way. I'm also conscious people are busy, so I suggest we turn now to perhaps if we begin with you, Larry, for any closing remarks. The screen's yours.
Thanks very much, Jamie. Yes, so it's just to say that the work of the NDV hubs is ongoing, and I'd welcome any interest from any of the participants just to get in touch with us, and that we hope that it will, that the work can link to the work of the GSDE and support it. It's meant to be, it's meant to be supportive to that, and that we hope this initiative can spread to other regions in the rest of the world, and we have had interest in that respect. So this is meant to be a global enterprise, as the special session on disarmament and as the GSDE resolution itself points to. It was fascinating hearing Pavel's talk. I read the publication, but it was great to hear it actually talked about it in the flesh. No, I'd like to see those experiments as well. Yeah, it's interesting, of course, that so many of them rely now on this great expansion and diffusion of satellite, open source satellite imagery that really has changed the game for what we can even consider and define to be verification. But it was also good that not only, I mean, there's a proper opportunities and challenges paper because the opportunity provided by those satellites to provide alternative forms of verification is there, but also the satellites themselves are at risk, and so tackling that issue, I think, is interesting. And I've been on panels with companies that do that kind of thing. So I think it'd be intriguing to do that. So that's great. And then with regard to the GSDE, now is the crunch time, and I hope that the momentum and all the work that Brazil and Norway and others have put into this, bears fruit. The there aren't many other resolutions at the moment, and this is as I said at the beginning, I think commitment to this idea can show that at the moment, while there are many agreements having fallen apart, that at least there can be some agreement on this key issue. And as we've heard, kind of with what Pavel's saying, that it's important that there are so many reasons why work on this is important. It's not just bringing together countries and a momentum, but it's the technical aspects. And until you start, and although work has been done, it hasn't been done at this multilateral level. And it's important to, winkle out some of the issues that may appear later on, precisely because if and when windows open, you don't want those things getting in the way. You don't want objections by certain stakeholders, military or otherwise, to not have been addressed in advance. I mean, you want those to be thought about, taken into account, and overcome in a way that's acceptable, so you can just proceed with the verification as wanted. We've seen this in many areas. So, yes. So, thank you very much for this this opportunity, Jamie, and thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you, Larry. Last but by no means least, Ambassador, remarks from your side or any closing thoughts? The screen is yours, sir.
So thank you, James. Just to emphasize that the GSTV NDV proposal is a recognition that the scientific community can and should, participate in the attainment of very important political goals. We recognize that in this area, diplomacy has also a very limited action, and for such a huge undertaking as a process like NDV, we count on the contribution of nuclear scientists. Interesting to note that the GSE started its work in 76 and accomplished in 96. So after 50 years, 5 decades that the GSE began its work, chances are that we're going to have a new edition of the GSE in the United Nations, which is a much more, I would say, robust and challenging mandate. This is a seed that Brazil and all in others, I think it's a collective endeavors. Brazil and Norway could not do this alone without UNIDIR, without the Vertic, and many other institutions, UNIDA. So perhaps this is a seed that I hope that will blossom in a appropriate time. So I thank for your attention, and let's keep our positive thinking that the next week this resolution will be adopted. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. That seems a good note to conclude on. Just before we do, I'd just like to thank all of our panelists for joining this event and giving up their time. Thanks also to those of you in the audience for giving us your time and engaging in the discussion. I'd also like to express my thanks for those that have been involved in the production of this event. So to Maria and to Nick, who joined us and made this possible. And of course, thank you to our funders for work in this area. It wouldn't be possible without the generous support of Norway, so we're very grateful. Just before I do close, I'd encourage you all, if you have time, to complete our anonymous feedback form. It takes a couple of minutes. It is anonymous, and you can find the link in the chat, but also through the QR code on the screen there. Please do give us feedback. It does help in improving things moving on. And with that, just remains for me to say have a good afternoon, a good evening, good night, depending on where this finds you. And thank you again for joining. Goodbye, everybody.